In the early days of the PlayStation 2, Zipper Interactive would debut a third-person shooter called SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs. Authentic, tactical, team-based, and online at a time when few other PlayStation titles were, SOCOM took the home console by storm. It gave Sony's exclusives a more mature face, provided multiplayer-centric shooters a new standard to compete against, and helped single-handedly move the PlayStation 2's network adapter and headset into gamers' homes. The debut of SOCOM 2 the following year confirmed SOCOM as a franchise that would be with the PlayStation for years to come, even as unsavory hackers attempted to ruin players' enjoyment. Yet, try as SOCOM would, lightning never seemed to strike thrice in the eyes of the series' faithful. SOCOM 3, Combined Assault, Confrontation, and many more would all proceed to be good if not great games in their own right. But whether helmed by Zipper or Slant Six, SOCOM never found its third pillar on which it could rest. And just as it seemed as if the series finally might, SOCOM 4 would both trip over its design and fall into a hole burrowed out of the PlayStation Network Outage of 2011. SOCOM was shattered, Zipper was shuttered, and one by one the entire series would go offline, though the hardcore would continue to find ways to keep the series' flame alive. This is the rise and fall of SOCOM.
It's a big part of what they do. They need to depend on the guy next to them. They need to be able to know that he's been very well trained and can take a big part of the burden on any mission. And so we thought it was a really good idea.
SOCOM's origins begin with Seth Luisi, who had worked with Sony Computer Entertainment America since 1994. First providing quality assurance work on titles like Mickey Mania, and then later helping to localize a bevy of classic role-playing games for the original PlayStation, such as Wild Arms and Final Fantasy VII. By the late 1990s, Luisi had transitioned over to game development and was trying to figure out how it is that Sony would define their next home console, the PlayStation 2. The original PlayStation and its rivals had brought 3D graphics to the industry. What would its successor do to demark a new generation of gaming, beyond having its games look prettier? One idea that Luisi had was a team-based military shooter. Games that encouraged team-based play, such as Counter-Strike, were popular at the time on the PC, but largely absent from the original PlayStation. Some, such as Tom Clancy's Rainbow Six, had been ported over, but their team-based aspect had been effectively stripped out in the process. Bringing a true team-based shooter to the PlayStation 2 would both make up for this discrepancy and help to greatly distinguish the console from its predecessor. And so, Luisi would begin to search for a video game developer that could help him do so, before arriving at the Redmond-based Zipper Interactive.
Got one. Got it. 31-6, deploy online, assault.
Prior to developing video games, a number of Zipper's employees, including Zipper co-founder Brian Soderbergh, had played a key role in the development of SimNet, a real-time combat simulation used by the United States military and NATO to replicate realistic missions and provide training for their personnel. Following Zipper's formation in 1995, the team had worked on an eclectic catalog of action titles exclusively for the PC that drew from their past experience, from Top Gun Hornet's Nest to MechWarrior 3. They had enjoyed a decent amount of critical and commercial acclaim with their last PC title, the arcade flight game Crimson Skies, attracting a sizable cult following. And this in turn attracted Luisi, who was not only impressed with Zipper's pedigree, but also by the team's mature and collaborative demeanor. The two parties synergized, and at E3 2001, Sony announced that Zipper Interactive would be developing a tactical, team-based third-person shooter exclusively for the PlayStation 2, titled SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs.
Target eliminated, sir.
Sony had already accrued a decent lineup of games from its first-party and third-party developers for their then nascent home console. But SOCOM, in addition to being one of its first team-based games, would also be one of the first to feature online multiplayer. Both Nintendo and Sega had dabbled in online play with their prior consoles, with services such as X-Band and SegaNet allowing gamers to play together over the internet with select titles. And now Sony, after foregoing online play with the original PlayStation, was ready to make its mark across the airwaves with the PlayStation 2's new online service. SOCOM, which would allow players to direct a team of United States Navy SEALs across both a single-player campaign and various multiplayer modes, would be one of the service's flagship titles, as well as one of its most authentic. In order to ensure that the title accurately portrayed the look and feel of its titular protagonists, Zipper would collaborate extensively with the United States Naval Special Warfare Command during the game's production, using the command's knowledge to inform the game's design and setting, motion capture technology to capture the SEALs' movements and physicality, and scanning technology to map their equipment onto every inch of their game's models. Finally, SOCOM would also be the first game to utilize the PlayStation 2's official headset, which would come bundled with every copy of the game. The headset, which Seth Luisi had played a direct hand in helping develop, would allow players to communicate amongst themselves in the game's multiplayer mode and issue commands to their AI-controlled squad in its single-player campaign using voice recognition technology. It was a highly ambitious project, and one that would pay off substantially when the game would release in August of 2002. SOCOM's single-player campaign sees the player lead a four-man team of SEALs, Kahuna, Boomer, Spectre, and Jester, on a series of adventures to fight terrorist groups across the globe. The game does its best to emulate the calculating feel of real-life Navy SEALs, with the player able to review the parameters of each level and customize their squad's weaponry before entering them, and issue precise directions to the SEALs using the command interface or headset. It has its issues. Its story is bare bones, the AI of the game's enemies and allies can be infuriating, and the lack of checkpoints only add to the challenge. But the level design is both strong and varied, making good use of all the tactical tools available at the player's disposal. However, SOCOM's true appeal would lie in the game's multiplayer, where other shooters of its era offered fast-paced experiences in which death was only as inconvenient as the time it took to respawn. SOCOM's 16-player team-based multiplayer matches were brutal in the best way possible.
SEALs victorious.
Shots that could kill instantly and a lack of respawning meant that players had to approach encounters methodically and stealthily across the game's three modes: suppression, demolition, and extraction. Victory was awarded not to the player with the rawest skill, but to the most strategic player, or rather the most strategic teams. SOCOM's multiplayer became an overnight success, establishing Sony's fledgling online ecosystem and drawing in millions of devoted players, and unfortunately, a few hackers.
Got him.
No online game is immune to hackers, but SOCOM would prove itself to be especially susceptible as a result of both the ease with which the PlayStation 2's hardware could be taken advantage of and the game's popularity. Hacks ranged from the overtly abrasive, such as being able to fly, to more subtle ones designed to feign skill, such as possessing double the normal amount of health or infinite ammunition. They were infuriating and, worse, would remain with the franchise throughout its entire history, well beyond the first game's confines. But they didn't diminish the inherent strength of SOCOM's design, or that of its sequel, SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs. Released in November of 2003, SOCOM 2's single player, which sees the player controlling SEALs Spectre, Jester, War Dog, and Vandal on another globe-trotting romp, is mostly similar to that of the first game, with a few tweaks here and there elevating its design, such as improved AI. Its multiplayer, on the other hand, would see a bevy of improvements. New maps and new game modes made for more variety than before, with 12 new maps added to the first game's 10, and 2 new, more complex game modes, Breach and Escort, joining the first game's 3. New weapons, such as the rocket launcher, grenade launchers, and mines, allowed for new strategic opportunities, and various other tweaks and improvements to the user experience, such as improvements to the clan system and being able to restrict certain weapon types in matches, made SOCOM 2's multiplayer a vastly improved version of an already great experience. While all of the SOCOM games would go on to have their fans, SOCOM 2 would remain the SOCOM game. The singular experience that perfectly epitomized what the series was and why it was great. After a year of absence, SOCOM would see no fewer than 3 new entries in 2005, each very different from each other but strong in their own ways. Arriving in October, SOCOM 3 would prove popular, but to a lesser degree than 1 or 2. The game's single player is significantly improved over those of its predecessors, with a stronger story stringing together the player's actions, a checkpoint system that activates upon completing objectives mid-level, and some of the series' most visually impressive and entertaining cutscenes thus far. The game's multiplayer, on the other hand, would prove more controversial. The smaller maps of the first and second game were gone, and in their place were massive, sprawling battlegrounds reminiscent of EA's Battlefield series, with up to 32 playable characters at once instead of 16. Players could now commandeer all manners of military vehicles, such as tanks and jeeps, with multiple characters able to ride around together as a unit. While many enjoyed the freshness brought upon by these changes, others were turned off, feeling their inclusion obfuscated the game's tactical edge. To them, the strength of the vehicles tipped the balance of the game more in favor of pure, raw skill than strategy, and the vast size of the playing fields made working together with the rest of one's team more of a hassle. As a play to bring fans of Battlefield away from their PCs to the PlayStation 2, it was a solid effort, but as a follow-up to SOCOM 1 and 2's design, it was lacking. SOCOM 3 is no less than a good game, one that would see many devoted players log hours upon hours into both its robust single-player and multiplayer offerings. Yet, to many fans, it would represent the beginning of the series' slow and gradual decline, a shift away from the first 2 games' intimacy and collaborative spirit in favor of more simplistic action. Also released the same week as SOCOM 3 was the series' first and only entry for mobile phones, SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs Mobile Recon. Developed by Iron Monkey and published by Jamdat Mobile, Mobile Recon is a top-down, sprite-based action game in the style of Gameloft titles such as Brothers in Arms: Art of War. The game casts players as SEALs Bronco and Wraith on a 2-man mission to Morocco to gather intelligence and fight terrorists. While much more action-oriented and lacking any of the multiplayer functionality of its console brethren, Mobile Recon nonetheless retains a modicum of the base game strategy in its design, with the ability to snipe enemies from a distance and play through missions stealthily for a bigger score. Finally, November would see Zipper release SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs Fireteam Bravo on Sony's then-new handheld console, the PlayStation Portable. Despite being developed for the portable console's lesser hardware, Fireteam Bravo is impressive in its efforts to emulate SOCOM 3's level of polish and content. Its single-player campaign, which follows SEALs Sandman and Lone Star on a worldwide terrorist hunt that runs concurrent to 3's storyline, features a decent amount of cutscenes and narrative flair. Likewise, its multiplayer offerings were incredibly robust, allowing up to 16 players to battle one another locally and online across 5 different game modes, and featuring many other console accoutrements such as leaderboards and clans. The game also features a new mode called Instant Action, which tasks the player with completing previously beaten areas from the single-player campaign with new objectives. And, as was the case with the first SOCOM, Fireteam Bravo would be something of a technological showcase for Sony's latest hardware upon release, being among the first games to utilize the official PlayStation portable headset for talking online, as well as one of the few to feature connectivity, or crosstalk, between the PlayStation Portable and the PlayStation 2. By completing specialized tasks in SOCOM 3 or Fireteam Bravo, and then syncing them together via USB, the player can unlock new features in both games, from firearms to playable characters. Nonetheless, for as impressive as it is, Fireteam Bravo is still held back by the PlayStation Portable's limitations. Most notably, because the handheld lacks a second analog stick, aiming is now done by automatically locking on to nearby enemies. While an adequate substitute given what Zipper was forced to work with, the lock-on mechanic makes the process of finding and killing enemies much easier, resulting in the game having a rather different feel than that of the series' first 3 titles. Fireteam Bravo would receive a warm reception upon its release, but this difference in feel, combined with the other discrepancies between the game and its console counterparts, would result in it not receiving as much support from the community as SOCOM 1, 2, or 3.
Se alzarán contra sus opresores y la liberación verdadera tomará el continente. Tan hermoso.
New era for Sony Computer Entertainment begins with PlayStation 3 now. Thank you very much and have a great show.
By 2006, support for the PlayStation 2 was winding down. Sony's stable of first-party developers were leaving the 6-year-old console, abandoning old franchises so that they could develop new ones for its soon-to-be-released successor, the PlayStation 3. But not Zipper Interactive. Days before the PlayStation 3's launch in November, Zipper, which had been officially acquired by Sony in January, would release both SOCOM U.S. Navy SEAL's Fireteam Bravo 2 for the PlayStation Portable and SOCOM U.S. Navy SEAL's Combined Assault for the PlayStation 2. Fireteam Bravo 2 largely follows in the footsteps of the first Fireteam Bravo, with some noteworthy changes. The game's single-player campaign foregoes its predecessor's linear globe-trotting adventures, instead taking place entirely in the fictitious Middle Eastern country of Tajikistan, and featuring branching missions that can be completed out of order. New systems, the Command Equity Point System and the Local Influence Rating System, reward non-lethal play and completed objectives with weapons, intelligence, and costumes. And the game's multiplayer features a host of new maps and modes to toy around with, complementing the first game's already robust multiplayer suite. Like its predecessor, Fireteam Bravo 2's lock-on aiming system dilutes the series' traditional feel, and progressing through its single-player can occasionally prove cumbersome and lacking in tactical opportunities. But overall, the game is a solid follow-up to the first Fireteam Bravo, and would be received as such by the community and press alike.
Sorry about that. Not.
Combined Assault, on the other hand, would encounter a more mixed response. The series' swan song for the PlayStation 2 is effectively a glorified expansion pack of SOCOM 3, featuring many of the same attributes and multiplayer maps, and allowed one to play against players of the former online. The game's single player, which also takes place in Tajikistan concurrent to Fireteam Bravo 2's story, brings some new functionalities to the table, such as the ability to play it cooperatively alongside 3 other players online. The game also features the Fireteam Bravo game's Instant Action mode, and, as with SOCOM 3 and Fireteam Bravo, Combined Assault and Fireteam Bravo 2 share crosstalk functionality. This time around, completing objectives in one game would result in the other game's levels being substantially affected. For example, defeating a squad of hostiles in Fireteam Bravo 2's single-player and then sinking both games would result in a corresponding squad being dead in Combined Assault's single-player. But for the most part, Combined Assault towed the party line. A line that was still enjoyed by many players, to be sure, but felt a little tired all the same. Given that Combined Assault was made in slightly less than a year and piggybacked directly off of 3's design, this feeling of sameness was understandable. But in the eyes of many pundits, it was high time that the SOCOM series changed things up. And indeed, change was about to come. At Sony's Gamers Day showcase in May of 2007, Sony announced that the Vancouver-based Slant Six games would be taking over the SOCOM series reins from Zipper for the foreseeable future. Slant Six Games had been formed in 2005 from former Rockstar Vancouver and Electronic Arts employees and had collaborated with Sony Bend to help create portions of the graphics engine used in Siphon Filter Dark Mirror. This work helped garner the attention of Luisi, who had been looking to take the franchise in new directions and genres on the PlayStation Portable. One thing led to another, and Slant Six was entrusted with continuing the franchise across both Sony's handheld and home consoles. Slant Six's first game, SOCOM U.S. Navy SEAL's Tactical Strike for the PlayStation Portable, would be the series' most unconventional game thus far. Released in November of 2007, Tactical Strike takes place in war-torn Panama and allows the player to choose between 9 different international special forces units to play as. However, rather than directly control any one member of their unit, the player indirectly controls their squad's movement and actions using the game's UI and a movement skimmer. This style of gameplay, which recalls that of Pandemic Studios' Full Spectrum Warrior, is impressive in concept, but not quite perfect in execution. The game's camera, which is locked behind each member of the unit, is finicky, and the team's AI is not as strong as one wishes it was, often foregoing taking cover in the middle of firefights. At the core of Tactical Strike is a refreshing idea, one that is complemented by many of its portable predecessors' bells and whistles, such as instant action mode, command equity, and local influence systems, and unsurprisingly, a robust online suite. But it's an idea that could have benefited from a little more polish. Slant Six's next title would be the series' long-awaited debut on the PlayStation 3, SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs Confrontation. Up until this point, each entry in the SOCOM series had featured both single-player and multiplayer components, even as the popularity of the latter continued to vastly overshadow that of the former. With Confrontation, however, Slant Six would buck series tradition, instead making Confrontation an online multiplayer-only experience. Speaking to IGN in May of 2008, Slant Six design director David Seymour would explain that while the studio understood the appeal of the series single-player, to them, it was always clear that community and competition were at the heart of the SOCOM experience. This, combined with the PlayStation 3's advanced hardware, integrated communication features, and new high-quality Bluetooth headset, which would come packaged with the game, made creating an online-only game on the PlayStation 3 an easy and feasible prospect. Or at least in theory. In practice, Confrontation would prove to be an unbridled mess upon its release in October of 2008. Endless disconnections, game-breaking freezes, shambling frame rates, as well as numerous bugs and glitches permeated Confrontation, making attempting to enter a match, let alone play one, a struggle in and of itself. As if to add insult to injury, Confrontation lacked many essential features, some of which, such as matching, calendars, and trophies, were even listed on its packaging and instruction manual, yet absent from the actual game itself. Fans and critics alike were appalled. Tactical Strike had its share of issues, but they hadn't significantly weakened SOCOM's name. Confrontation, on the other hand, seemed to single-handedly cast the future of the series into question. And yet, as time would pass, so too would the players' frustration surrounding Confrontation. Rather than abandon ship, Slant Six would work for months following the game's release to patch it into a workable state. And once it finally was, players found much to like. For all its faults, Confrontation had a strong strategic core, one that harkened back to the series' roots. SOCOM 3's massive maps and vehicles were gone, and in their place were more intimate struggles where communication was paramount. Confrontation's botched launch would remain a stain on the series' legacy, and an omen of the issues that many more online-only games would suffer from over the course of the next decade. Yet, in spite of its scars, Confrontation would prove to be one of the franchise's more popular titles in the long term, less so than SOCOM 1 and 2, but more so than the series' previous few titles. Slant Six's final foray in the SOCOM universe would arrive in February of 2010, with the release of SOCOM U.S. Navy SEALs Fireteam Bravo 3 for the PlayStation Portable.
Time! Cover me! Damn it! Pressure fire! Grenade!
Fireteam Bravo 3 offers a similar, if slightly lesser experience than its predecessors. Its single-player campaign, which sees the SEALs infiltrate the fictional Republic of Karatvia, is a little more engaged and action-oriented, and can now be played cooperatively with up to 3 other players. However, as a result of both this and other mechanical changes, it's also one of the series' easiest and least strategic experiences. While this wouldn't spill over into the game's multiplayer, which retained the previous entry's strain of portable tactical action, it does make Fireteam Bravo 3 a harder sell than the other Fireteam Bravo games. While Slant Six was busy chaperoning the SOCOM series, Zipper Interactive was developing an ambitious new property that would take the PlayStation 3's hardware to its limits: MAG. MAG was an online multiplayer first-person shooter in which players allied themselves with 3 private military companies, Valor Company, Sever, and Raven Industries, and battled one another for supremacy in massive 256-player battles. On the field of battle, each company would be divided into 4 platoons, and each platoon would in turn be divided into 4 8-player squads led by a more experienced squad leader that would attempt to direct their group to victory. Though MAG would not go on to have a very long tail following its release in January of 2010, it enjoyed good reviews and a dedicated community of players that lapped up its unique and manic take on the genre. But for as interesting as Zipper's massive action game experiment was, it was time to go back to the well. 2 months following MAG's release, Zipper would announce that it was returning to the SOCOM franchise with SOCOM 4 U.S. Navy SEALs.
Will allow them to do that.
Well, it sounds great, Travis, and the game is looking sharp. Now, is there anything else you want to mention before we head out?
Well, again, SOCOM 4 is a PlayStation exclusive. It comes out this holiday season, and definitely if team-based action interests you, this is the game to buy.
This is the one to check out. Great,
Yeah.
Travis, thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Kevin, great shooting, my man. Folks, hope you enjoyed that look at SOCOM 4. We're going to take a break now from the live set.
SOCOM 4's announcement would initially yield a groundswell of excitement from the SOCOM community, who were glad to see Zipper return to the franchise following Slant Six's missteps. However, as more and more information on the game would make its way to the public, reactions would become more tepid. Zipper was quick to proclaim SOCOM 4 to be the first real SOCOM on the PlayStation 3, painting Slant Six's work with Confrontation to be a deviation from the series' tenets. Yet, they also made clear, in both their words and early demonstrations of the title, that SOCOM 4 would not be exactly like the SOCOM titles of old either. Activision's Call of Duty franchise had ballooned in popularity, with the PlayStation versions of 2007's Call of Duty Modern Warfare and 2009's Modern Warfare 2 both easily eclipsing the SOCOM series' strong-selling titles. Meanwhile, Sony's other first-party developers had found great success with shooters of their own, with franchises such as Resistance, Killzone, and Uncharted all quickly establishing themselves as first-party staples on Sony's third home console. To Zipper, these franchises and the features that had catapulted them into mainstream popularity were the key to SOCOM's future. SOCOM 4 needed to follow in these games' footsteps and evolve the series in doing so, while still remaining true to its roots. Senior community manager Jeremy Dunham would describe Zipper's intentions with SOCOM 4 as being akin to what Capcom had succeeded at doing with Resident Evil 4, to refresh their franchise in such a way that would allow it to remain relevant and reach a wider audience, yet still retain the core essence of its predecessors. Unfortunately, when SOCOM 4 would finally launch in April of 2011, it was difficult to argue whether they had succeeded. The game's multiplayer mode lacked much of the series' signature feel and tactical depth, possessing a host of changes that left players feeling more as if they were playing a Call of Duty derivative than a new SOCOM title. Some of these changes, such as the inclusion of automatically regenerating health or the ability to respawn, could technically be turned off by playing the game in Classic mode. But others, such as the inclusion of mainstream quirks like kill streaks, a cover system, and the exclusion of series mainstays such as lobby and party systems, and old game modes such as Demolition, Escort, and Breach, left many old-school fans high and dry. Likewise, the game's single-player mode, returning after its absence from Confrontation, felt like Uncharted without its swashbuckling charm. A standard third-person action romp starring a 5-person NATO team instead of SEALs, with little tactical depth or stealth. In June of 2012, SOCOM fan site The Real SOCOM would receive a letter penned by an anonymous former Zipper employee, who claimed that SOCOM 4's faults were the result of Sony pushing Zipper too hard to copy elements from the industry's most popular shooters, and Zipper having a revolving door of directors that struggled to stand up to what they believed was best for the series. After collaborating successfully and diplomatically on the rest of the series, relations between Zipper and Sony broke down with 4, and the game suffered as a result. And as if things weren't already bad enough, hacking was about to make the new game's life even worse, but in a completely different way than what fans were used to.
The electronics giant says it's shut down the service, which is used by 75 million people worldwide, after suffering what the company called an external intrusion last Wednesday. However, it's unclear who was behind the hacking attack.
On April 20th, the eve of SOCOM 4's release, Sony's online entertainment service, the PlayStation Network, would be taken offline. What at first seemed an abrupt bout of maintenance quickly turned into a nightmare when, after nearly a week without service, Sony announced that the PlayStation Network had been hacked. The ensuing fallout of the breach would be tumultuous for Sony, with the media conglomerate reportedly suffering $171 million in losses. For some of the developers that use Sony's platforms, however, the breach would be even more taxing. Until the network's return on the 15th of May, players could neither purchase games from the PlayStation Network store nor play games online. SOCOM 4, a game that many players had purchased exclusively, if not primarily for its online offerings, was devastated. While it is unknown exactly how many players quit the game or forewent purchasing it entirely as a result of the outage, it was enough to result in the title being permanently crippled and over 30 Zipper staff being laid off in late May. Like Slant Six and Confrontation before it, Zipper would try its best to address players' frustrations with SOCOM 4 in the coming months, integrating features such as a party system and even a demolition mode into the title later in the year. But it was too little, too late. In March of 2012, Zipper would release Unit 13 for the PlayStation Vita. A third-person shooter with SOCOM trappings, Unit 13 joined Nihilistic Software's Resistance Burning Skies as part of an early push to prove the PlayStation Vita was capable of running console-quality software. While possessing little in the way of story or competitive multiplayer, Unit 13 would find a small niche of supporters who appreciated the game's polished and straightforward action. Unfortunately, fans that hoped the title would foreshadow a return to form for the SOCOM developer were about to be disappointed. On March 30th, Sony announced the closure of Zipper Interactive. For fans, the announcement was sad, yet unsurprising, given the multitude of hardships Zipper had endured following SOCOM 4's release. For Zipper, however, their demise was not just upsetting, but untimely. Speaking on IGN's podcast in June of 2014, Jeremy Dunham would explain that while Zipper had a lot to prove following SOCOM 4, they finally felt themselves capable of tackling it just before they were shuttered.
We were really proud. That's part of the great tragedy of Zipper for us, is we as a team and really come together, and we're really happy and excited about how well Unit 13 turned out on the amount of time that we had, and we thought that it was we thought it was a forecast of, okay, we're back. We're going to go back to the glory days of SOCOM 2, SOCOM 1, and really show people that we can make great games, and we just didn't.
The years that would follow would see the bad news continue to hound what remained of SOCOM. In August of 2012, Sony would terminate online support for all the SOCOM games on the PlayStation 2 and the PlayStation Portable. In June of 2013, Slant Six would close after struggling with its own financial woes for a year following a relationship gone sour with Capcom. And finally, in January of 2014, Sony would pull the plug on the servers for MAG, SOCOM 4, and Confrontation. What's left of the SOCOM community has tried various avenues to keep the franchise's spirit alive. Some have supported spiritual successors to the franchise, such as Resurgence or H-Hour World's Elite, the latter of which briefly had the support of SOCOM 1 and 2 director David Sears. Others have used the computer program X-Link Kai, which allows games with LAN support to be played online to continue competing in SOCOM 2, 3, and beyond across the airwaves of the internet. And others still have attempted to campaign for a remastering of the series' PlayStation 2 games for the PlayStation 3 and the PlayStation 4, but to limited success. Speaking to PS Nation in December of 2015, President of Sony Worldwide Studios Shuhei Yoshida would express his appreciation for the passion of fans that continue to support the franchise, but asserted that the publisher didn't have plans for a new SOCOM title, remastered or otherwise. Sony needed to balance what they could do with the number of people that would enjoy what they did. And as vocal as parts of the SOCOM community continued to be, they weren't enough to achieve this balance. Of all the circumstances in which video game series have fallen from grace, few remain as wrought with ambiguity as SOCOM's. Would SOCOM 4's flaws have doomed the series to its fate, regardless of the PlayStation Network outage? Or did the outage kill any chance, however slim, that the franchise had of continuing? If 4's growth had never been stinted right out of the gate, Would Zipper have been able to lick its wounds and return the franchise to its former glory with SOCOM 5? Or would Sony's unwillingness to continue competing with Call of Duty have killed 5's chances of ever happening regardless? The world may never know, but what is known is that SOCOM, for the brief period in which it thrived, was a robust and beloved part of the PlayStation ecosystem. More than just a novelty, SOCOM provided players with a compelling and addictive online suite at a time when such experiences were few and far between on consoles. It struggled to find a strong and coherent identity following its second release and suffered from hackers that sought to subvert other players' pleasure. But it remains a critical part of the PlayStation's legacy, one that set the bar, and then some, for all online shooters that followed in its wake.